Everything was quiet. The whole apartment was dark, with only a faint glow from the hallway slipping through the curtains. But just as she stood by the kitchen sink, there was a soft. She turned around. The balcony door was wide open. A cold breeze drifted in. And there, standing perfectly still, was the maid, Sari. She wasn't moving. She wasn't turning around. Barefoot. Eyes wide open. And then, as if she were sleepwalking, Sari began climbing the railing. Slowly. Every motion looking like it was being controlled by something else. Rachel screamed. She lunged from the kitchen and yanked Sari down. They both collapsed to the floor. The balcony door slammed shut behind them. Sari sat there, dazed, no idea how she'd ended up outside. In the middle of the night, on the 13th floor, on the edge of the railing. You'd think it was an accident, right? Sleepwalking? A weird joke? But no. She wasn't sleepwalking. And this wasn't the first time someone had tried to step over that balcony. Someone used to live next door. An elderly woman, alone. She died in her apartment. Her body wasn't discovered for almost a week. And ever since then, that unit had been left empty. But, was it really empty? Tonight's story isn't a movie. It's not a novel. This really happened, in Changi Village, Singapore. It's a place where no one says much to your face, but every pair of eyes looks away when you ask about the 13th floor, Block B. If you're still brave enough, stay till the end of the video. Because this story is only just beginning. Rachel Tan wasn't the superstitious type. She grew up in Singapore. Went to international school, studied abroad, and now worked for a logistics company headquartered near Changi Airport. To her, life was something you could plan, measured by logic, good decisions, and spreadsheets. Not by negative energy, not by feng shui, and certainly not by ghost stories passed down through generations. But even someone as rational as Rachel had to admit. That apartment was too cheap. Rachel and her husband Kenneth Tan were both office workers with stable incomes. They had 2 growing kids and a live-in maid. They needed a space big enough to live comfortably but still affordable. And anyone who knows Singapore real estate knows, it's crowded, expensive, and always climbing. So when their agent called to say there was a 4-bedroom HDB flat in Changi Village for rent, at nearly 35% below market rate, they could hardly believe it. Changi sounded far. But it really wasn't. Rachel worked near the airport, Kenneth freelanced from home, and the kids went to school nearby. The area was quiet, close to the sea, with lots of greenery. The building was old, yes, but well maintained. When they went to view the apartment, Rachel even thought to herself, how could a place this nice be this cheap? The agent smiled. He didn't hide anything. The unit next door has been empty for a while, he said. They say the previous tenant passed away inside. Took a while before anyone noticed. But that's the next unit. The person was gone, what was there to be scared of? The apartment was clean, bright, well ventilated. The layout was good. Southeast facing, if you cared about feng shui. That's actually a lucky direction. Everything made sense. And the rent was an absolute bargain in a market this crazy. They signed the lease that same week. The apartment was on the 13th floor. Block B, at the end of a long hallway. The corridor was paved with old granite tiles, dimly lit with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed when the wind blew. Only 4 units per floor. The one next door really was vacant, the lock was rusted, the mailbox untouched, dust settled over the faded welcome mat like a quiet warning. Rachel had a strange feeling when they moved in. But she shook it off. Work was work. Life was life. The dead couldn't hurt the living, at least, that's what she used to believe. What she didn't know was, some apartments aren't meant for the living. They're scars. Lingering remnants. And if you live close enough, they don't need to step into your home. They just need to watch you, through the wall. The apartment 13B4, right next to Rachel's, was a silent void. There were no sounds of doors opening or closing. No footsteps. No lights turning on after 6 p.m. The wooden door had faded to a silvery gray from years of sun and rain. The nameplate had peeled off, leaving only faint traces of old glue. The mailbox below was stuffed with unread flyers. A damp, worn-out welcome mat still sat at the threshold, its edges frayed, speckled with green mold. It lay there like a forgotten relic. Or more precisely, a greeting no one dared to answer anymore. When they first moved in, Rachel casually asked a few questions to one of the neighbors below, a retired Chinese man who often watered his plants on the balcony in the mornings. She kept her tone light, just curious. "Uncle, is the unit next to ours vacant?" The old man paused, his expression darkening for a brief second. He nodded, but didn't answer right away. A few moments later, he turned back to his orchids and muttered in a mix of Hokkien and English. "Old woman, died there. Alone. Long time ago. No family." Rachel froze. The man added a few more details, short and simple. A widow had passed away inside that apartment. Her body wasn't discovered until the smell started leaking into the hallway. Nearly a week passed before someone called the police. A quiet death. Alone. No one beside her. No one to send her off. The apartment was sealed off for a long time afterward. A young family once moved in. Then an elderly couple. But each tenant left after just a few months, without explanation, without warning. Every time someone moved in, the neighbors watched quietly. And every time someone moved out, no one said a word. Rumors started to spread among the building staff. One cleaning lady said she heard wind chimes ringing in the empty unit, at 2 a.m. Even though the place had no power. Others claimed to have seen a figure standing on the balcony during early morning jogs. But when they went up to check, the door was still locked. The unit still dark. People started calling it Rumah Senyap, the silent house. In a place like Singapore, where everything runs on order, logic, and structure. Stories like these are dismissed as superstition. But what's chilling is, no one says it didn't happen. They only say, "Don't ask. Don't look. And don't open your curtains at night." Rachel wasn't sure what to believe. She didn't tell Kenneth, and certainly not Sari. She believed she was rational enough to rise above vague, half-whispered tales. But on that first night, as she stood on her balcony and looked toward the unit next door, Rachel felt something. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a shape. It was just a space on the other side of the wall, very empty. But not at all hollow. It felt like something was waiting. The first week passed in peace. Rachel even felt a quiet sense of gratitude. They'd found a place that was spacious, breezy, and shockingly affordable in the middle of a real estate frenzy. The apartment was old, but airy. Every afternoon, sea breeze swept through the windows, keeping the home cool without air conditioning. Evenings were cozy. After dinner, Rachel and Kenneth drank tea in the living room. The kids played in their rooms. Sari cleaned up in the kitchen. Everything moved in rhythm. A real home. Until the 8th night. It was around 2:10 a.m. Rachel woke up for no clear reason, no dream, no noise, no alarm. Just a strange feeling. The room was dark. Kenneth was asleep beside her. Rachel sat up, reached for her phone to check the time, and lay back down. But the moment her head touched the pillow, she heard something. like furniture being dragged slowly across a tiled floor. Her eyes opened. She listened. Silence. Then, a few seconds later, again. This time, longer. Clearer. As if someone was gently dragging a heavy table or chair, but trying not to make noise. Rachel frowned. She couldn't pinpoint the direction, but it felt close. Too close. She got out of bed. Feet touching the floor, and turned toward the wall on her left, the one shared with the empty apartment. She pressed her ear to it, heart pounding. And then silence. Nothing else. No dragging. No thuds. Not even a breath. Rachel pulled back and furrowed her brow. She stepped out into the hallway and looked around. All the other doors were shut. The corridor was so quiet, it was eerie. She went back inside, telling herself, maybe it came from upstairs. But deep down, she knew. That sound didn't come from above. It was on the other side of that wall. She returned to bed, trying to sleep. But the noise echoed in her mind, like a broken recording looped in slow motion. The next morning, she told Kenneth. He just chuckled. Probably something fell over in the unit next door. You're just sensitive. Rachel nodded, but wasn't fully convinced. As she washed her face, she stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes looked tired, faintly shadowed. She saw her own reflection, but for a fleeting second, she had this strange feeling, that the reflection behind her seemed colder. Not in temperature. In energy. She shook it off. Splashed water on her face again. Sat down for breakfast. But the strange thing was, the noises continued. Not every night. But 3 or 4 times during the following week. Always around the same time, 2 a.m. Sometimes it was dragging sounds. Sometimes light tapping on the wall. Sometimes, whispers. In a language she didn't recognize, too faint to understand, but clear enough to keep her awake. At first, she thought it was all in her head. But how could a woman in her 30s, well-educated, with a degree in economics, a mother of 2 who had lived in the U.S., lose sleep over imagined noises from an empty apartment? Except, it wasn't in her head. Because a few nights later, Sari, the maid, heard them too. At first, Rachel thought she was the only one in the house who sensed something off. But then, things started to change. It was a Monday morning, just before 6:30 a.m. Rachel was always the first to wake up. She liked to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee before waking the kids. She stepped out of her bedroom, turned down the short hallway to the living room, and immediately froze. The balcony curtains were wide open. Not just partially drawn. Wide open, letting the early sunlight stream across the floor, casting patchy golden shapes on the tiles. Rachel glanced around. Everything else was exactly as it had been the night before. The lights were still off. The ceiling fan hadn't been touched. But the curtains, someone had clearly opened them. She walked over and gently pulled them shut again. Then she paused. Maybe Sari had opened them early? That would make sense. With a live-in helper. Waking up early to clean or let in light wasn't unusual. But something didn't sit right. Sari hadn't come out of her room yet. In fact, she didn't appear until nearly 10 minutes later, apron tied hastily, hair slightly messy. Rachel asked casually, "Did you open the curtains this morning?" Sari shook her head. "No, ma'am. I just woke up." "I thought you did." Rachel didn't press further. She simply nodded and returned to the kitchen. But the question lingered with her all morning. If it wasn't me, and it wasn't Sari, then who opened them? And it kept happening. Every few days, Rachel would find the curtains open, without anyone admitting to it. She started paying closer attention. One night, she made a point to close them herself, neatly pinning the two panels together with a clip. But the next morning, although the clip was still in place, one side of the curtain had been pulled back, just enough to form a gap wide enough for someone outside to look in. Another evening, Rachel stood in the living room near dusk. The daylight was fading. She walked over to close the curtains. And just then, a breeze drifted through. The sheer curtain fluttered, softly, almost delicately, like someone's hand had brushed across it. Rachel froze. No windows were open. No fan was on. The air was still. And yet the curtain moved, subtly, trembling at the edges, as if an invisible hand was toying with it from behind. That night, Rachel drew the curtains tightly closed and wedged a chair against them. She didn't mention it to Kenneth, he'd just say she was overthinking again. But the next morning, when she stepped out of the bedroom, her heart sank. The chair had been pushed aside. And the curtain was half open, again. A chill ran down her spine. For the first time in years, she asked herself, was this truly a safe apartment? Or just a home built beside a door that never fully closed? A door to something else. That day, Rachel decided to install a camera in the living room, pointed directly at the balcony. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't want to frighten the kids, or Sari. But she needed to be sure that this wasn't just in her head. She just didn't expect the footage to rob her of sleep for nights afterward. That night, Rachel couldn't fall asleep. She lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, ears tuned to every little creak in the apartment. It was close to 3 a.m. Kenneth lay beside her, breathing deeply in his sleep. The room was silent, but inside her, everything felt like it was boiling over. She felt uneasy. No clear reason, just a deep, instinctual tension. Like someone, somewhere, was standing on the other side of the wall, quietly watching. After several minutes of hesitation, Rachel sat up. Barefoot, she stepped into the hallway toward the living room. She didn't turn on the lights. She wanted her eyes to stay adjusted to the dark. As she reached the center of the room, dim light from the corridor outside slipped in through the sheer curtain, just enough for her to see it. The curtain was open. This time, she was sure it wasn't the wind. No one had brushed past it. Rachel herself had shut it before bed, even clipped it tightly. And now, one side was drawn back, as if someone had pulled it open to peer inside. Her heart pounded as she walked slowly toward the balcony. The sliding glass door was still closed. But what grabbed her attention wasn't in her own home. It was the view beyond. The apartment at 13B4, the one that had shown no signs of life for weeks, was glowing faintly with a warm, dull light. Not a lamp. Not ceiling lights. More like a flickering, yellowish hue, resembling a candle or old flashlight. It wasn't strong enough to light the whole room. But it was enough for Rachel to see the figure. A silhouette, standing in the middle of the supposedly empty living room. She couldn't make out the face, but the shape was clear, thin, slightly hunched, hair falling around the shoulders. The figure didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even seem to look directly at her. And yet, somehow, Rachel knew, it knew she was there. Only a small balcony, a pane of glass, separated them. But Rachel felt as if she were staring across a threshold between two worlds. She backed away. Eyes locked on the figure. It remained still. Unmoving. Swallowing hard, she reached up and slowly pulled the curtain shut, careful not to make a sound. Her heart thudded violently. And just as the curtain closed, the light across the balcony blinked out. The empty apartment was once again swallowed by darkness. Rachel stood frozen for a long while, ears ringing. Her palms cold and damp. She didn't return to the bedroom right away. Instead, she went to the table, opened her laptop, and logged into the security camera app she'd installed days earlier. The footage showed the curtain being drawn open, from inside the room. No one was nearby. No footsteps. No motion. But the curtain moved, bit by bit, as though pulled by an invisible hand just beyond the camera's reach. Rachel didn't know how long she sat there watching. Her eyes fixated on each frame, replaying the moment again and again. No person. No clear movement. Only one thing was certain. According to building records, the apartment next door hadn't been rented in over 3 years. No power. No water. No people. No life. But tonight, Rachel had seen someone. At first, Rachel didn't pay much attention. She was too busy, between work, the kids, and the silent questions lingering every night. The curtain that kept opening. The light from the empty apartment next door. The shadowy figure she still hadn't dared to mention to Kenneth. She kept it all to herself. Afraid of being told she was imagining things, or worse, losing her mind. But the change didn't start with her. It started with Sari. Their helper. Loyal, diligent, and always smiling in the mornings. She woke earlier than anyone, prepared breakfast, did the laundry, cleaned every corner of the apartment. Rachel trusted her with everything, house keys, the kids, even her peace of mind. Sari was like the soul of their home. But now, something was different. She spoke less. She no longer smiled. The soft Indonesian songs she used to hum while cooking were gone. She stopped asking what Rachel wanted for dinner. Instead, she just moved through the day, quiet, mechanical, hollow. Rachel first noticed it on a Wednesday morning. Walking into the kitchen and finding Sari standing at the sink, holding a plate, but not washing it. Not moving. Just standing there. Still. As if listening to something very far away. Or worse, like she wasn't here at all. Sari? Rachel called gently. Sari jumped, dropping the plate into the sink. Luckily, it didn't break. You okay? Sari smiled faintly, but her eyes were blank. Sorry, ma'am. Just feeling a little tired. But Rachel knew, this wasn't just fatigue. Something deeper was going on. And she began to watch more closely. Sari often glanced toward the balcony whenever she passed the living room. Sometimes Rachel would catch her standing right at the sliding door, staring across at the empty apartment next door. Not moving. Not saying a word. One afternoon, Rachel came home earlier than usual. She opened the door quietly, thinking everyone might be napping. But from the hallway, she saw it, Sari. Sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, facing the open balcony. In front of her was an empty glass. Her hands rested on her knees. And her lips moved quickly, muttering something in Indonesian under her breath. Rachel didn't understand the words. But the tone chilled her. Sari, she called. Sari turned around, eyes unfocused. She nodded politely, then stood up as if nothing had happened. Rachel didn't press her. She simply watched as Sari walked away. Her steps heavy, like she was carrying something invisible and unbearable. That night, as she and Kenneth were getting ready for bed, Rachel brought it up. Sari's been off lately, don't you think? Kenneth shrugged. Maybe she's homesick. Or going through some kind of emotional jet lag. Domestic workers can be more stressed than we realize. Rachel didn't argue. But deep down, she knew this wasn't ordinary tiredness. It was something else. A quiet, pulling away. A loss of tether to the real world. And if it went on any longer, Sari might not come back to herself at all. Rachel decided she'd speak to her the next morning. Not as her employer, but woman to woman. Someone who could feel the same weight pressing on both their chests. And so, the next morning, while Sari was washing dishes, Rachel approached gently and asked, "Sari, you're home the most. Have you noticed anything strange? Anything that makes you feel uncomfortable?" Sari froze. Water kept running. Soap slid over the dishes. After a long pause, she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dia masih memanggil saya." She's still calling me. Rachel said nothing. She's still calling me. She didn't ask who. Didn't press further. She nodded once, then turned back toward her room, as if she hadn't heard a thing. But inside, her heart was pounding. Who was calling? From where? And why? That afternoon, Rachel opened the security camera app, the one she'd secretly installed in the living room weeks earlier. A tiny orb-shaped device, hidden behind a potted orchid near the balcony. She hadn't set it up to spy on anyone. Just to prove to herself that what she was experiencing was real. And it was. Rachel began scrubbing through the footage from the past week. Most of it was uneventful, Sari walking around cleaning, the kids playing games, Kenneth reading the paper. But around 2:17 a.m. on one night, the footage made her freeze. No one entered the living room. No wind. No movement. And yet, the balcony curtain began to shift. Little by little. A gentle tug to the left. Then to the right. Pause. Then again. And then, just for a second, a dark blur passed behind the glass. Like the shadow of a person standing on the balcony. Just a flicker. She couldn't make out the face, but the posture. It looked eerily like the figure she'd seen that night in the dim light of the supposedly empty unit next door. And that wasn't the worst part. She kept watching. Around 3:03 a.m., the camera captured something else. Sari, who everyone thought was asleep in her room, stepped into the living room. No lights on. No shoes. She didn't look toward the camera. She simply walked straight to the balcony. She stood there, facing the glass. Still. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then suddenly, Sari raised her hand. Pressed her palm gently against the glass. Her forehead almost touched the door. As if she were listening to someone, whispering from the other side. She stood there for over 3 minutes. Not moving. Not speaking. And just like that, she turned and walked back to her room. When the door shut behind her, Rachel finally exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She didn't understand. Why was Sari out there at that hour? Why that spot? Who was whispering through the glass? And most of all, why hadn't anyone else in the house, besides her, noticed any of this? Rachel saved the video. Copied it to a private folder. Password protected it. She didn't dare show Kenneth. She knew he wouldn't believe it. Worse, he might make her take down the cameras altogether for freaking everyone out. But Rachel believed. And more than that, she was afraid. Afraid that the apartment next door wasn't empty anymore. Afraid that something had started to move. Not content to stay in its own world, but inching closer. Each night. Each step. Each breath. Quietly. Silently. Rachel never thought she'd do it. She was a woman of logic. Someone who believed in systems, in science, in the cause behind every effect. But when you've seen what the camera recorded, when you live with someone who's slowly slipping out of reality, When you can no longer sleep at night because something unseen lurks in every shadow of your home. Even your beliefs start to shift. That afternoon, over a quick coffee with an old college friend, Rachel casually mentioned what had been happening. Not in detail. Not asking for help. Just sharing. Her friend didn't laugh. Didn't ask many questions either. She simply tore a piece of paper, scribbled down a name, and handed it over. Madam Lim, Peranakan. An old bomoh. No ads. No social media. But very effective. Rachel took the paper without a word. That evening, she made the call. A low, warm but firm voice answered. No name, no address asked. Just one line after Rachel briefly described her apartment. I'll come. Tomorrow morning. Before the sun is fully up. The next morning, Rachel was up early. Kenneth had already left for work. The kids were getting ready for school. Sari hadn't come out of her room yet. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:28 a.m. Standing at the door was a woman in her 60s. Her silver hair was neatly tied into a bun. She wore a dark purple kabaya and carried a worn batik bag. She looked at Rachel and nodded. The unit next door. There's a female presence. Rachel let her in. Madam Lim didn't smile. Didn't shake hands. She walked in like she'd been here many times before, scanning every corner, every doorway, every point where shadow met light. There's a cold scent, she murmured. No one died in this unit. But next door, there was a cremation suani. A silent death. Then she opened her bag. Inside were items Rachel had only ever seen in stories. A bundle of fresh pandan leaves tied with dried banana fiber. A small glass vial with scented water, sweetgrass and camphor. 3 short black candles. A small bronze dagger. And a carved wooden disc etched with old Malay script. Without explanation, Madam Lim began the ritual. She burned a dried leaf and let the smoke drift through the room. She poured the scented water in a circle near the balcony. Standing by the balcony with her eyes closed for a moment. Then she turned to Rachel and spoke softly. She's not malicious. But she's lonely. And spirits like that, they cling easily to the living. Especially women. Especially those who stay home all day. Rachel knew she was talking about Sari. I can't drive her out of the unit next door. I'm not allowed to enter. But I will seal the path between your homes. No one here is to open the curtains for the next 3 days. Rachel nodded. Madam Lim packed her things without another word. Before leaving, she placed a string of dark wooden beads in Rachel's hand and gave her one last instruction. Hang this on the front door handle. If the color changes, call me. Immediately. The door shut behind her. No one was allowed on the balcony. No one peeked at the apartment next door. She even taped a small sticky note to the sliding glass. Do not open. The first 3 nights passed without incident. No curtain noises. No shadows on the camera. No whispers. Even Sari seemed better, eating regularly, smiling again, though still quiet. Rachel started to believe, maybe Madam Lim had truly sealed something off. But on the 4th night, everything fell apart. It was 2:36 a.m. Rachel woke suddenly, no sound, no nightmare. The bedside lamp cast a soft orange glow on the wall. Then, a sound. Click. The latch on the balcony door. A sound she knew all too well. One that should not be happening now. Rachel froze. She had locked the door herself that night. Double-checked it, like always. She got out of bed, stepping quietly into the hallway. The motion sensor light didn't switch on. Not wind. Not an accident. A deliberate motion, strong and straight. Cold air poured into the apartment. And then, there was Sari. She stood in the center of the room. Her back to Rachel. Arms limp at her sides. Hair messy, pajamas wrinkled. Barefoot. Completely still. Staring toward the balcony, where the flickering lights from the opposite building blinked like the dying pulse of a heart. Rachel whispered, "Sari?" No response. "Sari." Louder. This time, Sari turned, slowly. Her eyes were wide, the whites showing more than the pupils. Her face, blank. But what chilled Rachel wasn't her eyes. It was what stood behind her. No open door. But she was here. Rachel stepped back instinctively, heart pounding. She grabbed the remote and flicked on every light in the room. The brightness swept across the apartment. There was no one on the balcony. Only Sari, now trembling, looking at Rachel with a dazed expression. "Ma'am, what am I doing here? Why are my feet so cold?" She remembered nothing. Not opening the door. Not walking out in the middle of the night. Not facing that thing. Rachel helped her back to her room, tucked her in. One of the beads had changed color. From deep black to pale gray. Like the color of cooled ashes. Rachel stared at the string of beads hanging on the front door. One bead had changed color. Not from sunlight. Not from age. It had faded suddenly, from deep brown to a pale, ashy gray, as if something had drained all the life from inside it. She reached out and touched it. It felt like nothing. No warmth. No cold. Just emptiness. She knew what it meant. And she knew Madame Lim could no longer help. Not because she lacked power. But because she wasn't allowed to enter the apartment next door. And whatever was creeping closer, was coming from there. "I think we need prayers, maybe a cleansing." The voice on the other end replied calmly. "The abbot will come tomorrow. Before noon." The next day, light rain fell over the city. Not heavy, but gray and steady. At around 2 p.m., a monk arrived at her door, Venerable Tik Min Dao, a slender man in his 50s, his face calm and composed. Like someone long accustomed to what others might call unbelievable. He didn't bring much with him. Just a yellow cloth bag, a large wooden mala, a small flask of consecrated water. A few printed Buddhist talismans on thin paper, and a small bronze bell. Rachel told him everything, this time, holding nothing back. From the noises at night, the figure behind the curtain. The light in the empty apartment, to Sari, who seemed less and less like herself each passing day. The monk nodded, unsurprised. "It's not a malevolent spirit," he said. "But it is a lost one. She died alone. No incense. No farewell. And her spirit still lingers here, looking for shelter. Walls cannot stop spiritual energy. Even if you don't share a home, the boundary is not enough. What we need now is chanting. A seal. And a warning." Rachel didn't fully understand. But she trusted him. The ritual began at 3:15 p.m. He lit 3 sticks of incense, one at the balcony door, one at the main entrance, and one at the wall that separated her apartment from Unit 13B4. Then he sat in silence, meditating for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally rang the bell, his chanting was soft but steady. Not theatrical. Just calm, even, and powerful, each syllable echoing through the air like it was shaking something awake in the walls. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Namo Guiding Master Amitabha Buddha. Namo Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. The bell chimed gently in rhythm. The scent of incense filled the apartment, not sweet, not sharp. Cold. Deep. The monk walked slowly around the home, sprinkling the consecrated water in each corner, over every doorway, behind the TV, beneath the beds, the places people usually ignore, but where spirits tend to hide. At the shared wall, he placed a talisman printed with Sanskrit script, pressed his palm against it, and whispered with closed eyes, "You are not banished." And a tiny mirror, face down. This mirror will reflect movement. Do not touch it. Do not turn it. And do not stare into it for long. The ritual ended. The monk stood, gathered his items, and bowed before the small altar in the living room. "I've chanted, to help her remember who she was. I've sealed, to block the path. And I've warned, to set the rule. If after today you still see her, then she is no longer a wandering soul. She's something else." He didn't elaborate. Didn't accept any payment. Only took a small red envelope, a gesture of respect from Rachel. Before leaving, he glanced once toward the balcony and said softly, "For the next 3 days, don't leave anyone alone in this home. Especially the one who once heard the voice." 3 days passed since the monk performed the ritual. During those days, Rachel made sure no one was ever left alone. She adjusted her work schedule and stayed home. Kenneth worked from home too. Sari stayed close. The apartment was quiet, no curtain movements, no whispers, no shadows on camera. Everything seemed normal again. But sometimes, normal is just a thin layer covering a crack that hasn't fully healed. 1 week later. Saturday morning. Rachel was folding laundry in the living room. Sari was mopping near the balcony where sunlight streamed gently across the tiles. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Until Rachel, out of habit, glanced toward the door, at the string of dark wooden beads. She checked it every day. Looked. Moved on. But today, she paused. For no clear reason. Just a feeling. She stepped closer. A second bead had changed. Not the pale gray of the first one, but a dull, murky gray, like ash mixed with wet mud. Rachel swallowed hard. She didn't say a word. Didn't alert Sari. Just quietly turned back, walked into her bedroom, picked up her phone, and wrote a note to herself. Second bead, April 14th, 10:12 a.m. That evening, while preparing dinner, Rachel asked Sari, casually, but with a certain caution, "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" Sari looked up, wiped her hands on her apron, and thought for a moment. Then replied softly, "I don't hear the voice anymore, ma'am." Rachel exhaled, relieved. But then Sari added, "But, sometimes, I still see her." Rachel froze. "Where?" Sari pointed toward the balcony. "In the apartment next door. She doesn't look over here anymore. She just walks around her place. Like she's living again, but alone. From the kitchen to the couch. From the couch to the balcony. Sometimes she sits at the dining table. But she never looks over here now. She doesn't call. She's not angry." Rachel felt a weight press against her chest. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Sari shook her head. "No. I feel sorry for her." She smiled, a small, sad smile. It's like, she knows she's no longer part of the living. And she's just trying to stay, in the home she never really left. Rachel didn't answer. She turned away and stared through the balcony glass. The curtains were still closed. But she could feel it, just beyond that thin wall, there was still another world. No longer loud. No longer crossing over. But still there. A presence. A spirit. No longer calling. No longer trying to step across. Just, staying. silently. As if she was now a permanent part of the space. And one day, when the living leave, when this apartment is rented again, someone else might stand in front of Unit 13B4 and wonder to themselves, why is this place so cheap?